Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of In-Depth Review. This is a series where I take a TTRPG product, most of the time D&D, but every so often I branch off, and I do an in-depth review. When I say in-depth, I mean in-depth. I will go chapter by chapter through this thing, saying the things I like, saying the things I don't like, saying the things that I think they did really well, saying the things that I think they need to do better. All that stuff all bundled up into one generally really long video. Today's in-depth review is going to be Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel. This is the new book by Wizards of the Coast. It just came out today, and it is what I call an adventure collection, where it's not one overarching story. It's a bunch of little adventures that are linked by a kind of a common theme, but they're not really narratively related. Quick reminder, if you do enjoy the stuff I put out, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon and to turn notifications on. All those the things are really important, not only to let me know that you guys like this stuff, but for other people to see it. As I mentioned, my in-depth reviews are in-depth. They generally take well over an hour to get through, and a lot of people that show up to these videos are not interested in a full in-depth review. They just want to know whether they should buy it. So, at the beginning of all of these, I always have 3 different should I buy it sections for the 3 different kind of buyers I believe there are for D&D and just tabletop RPG products. The first group of buyers is players. Players are specifically people that are primarily going to be making a single character and sitting down at a table to play their character. They have a very different set of needs and wants, basically revolving around what can I use to make an interesting character that I want to play. The second group is Game Masters, or Dungeon Masters, as they are called in D&D. That group has a very different set of needs and wants. A Dungeon Master is going to be sitting behind the Dungeon Master screen. They're going to be running the game. Dungeon Masters sometimes may not even use the entire adventure. They may just take bits and pieces, maybe monster stat blocks or things like that, to use in their own home settings. But they're going to have a very different set of needs and wants than a player. The third group is a group that I call Lore Hounds. Lore Hounds are basically people that may never sit at a D&D table in their little lives, but they're really they're really interested in the source material. You know, maybe they really love the world of the Forgotten Realms, or Eberron has always just been really interesting to them, or the things like that. So these players these people are going to have a very different set of wants and needs than the other two. So, should you buy this book? Well, let's find out. The first group, players. Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel is what I call an adventure, I guess, compendium, or adventure collection, I guess would be a better thing. Basically, it's a bunch of adventures that aren't really narratively attached to each other. Like, it's not one overarching narrative. There are a bunch of adventures that are kind of similar to each other because they all focus around maybe a similar theme or subject or something like that. And that's what Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel is. So from that aspect, a lot of this book is not going to be something that the players can use, because it's literally, I think it's 12 or 13 different adventures. So, you know, well, I can count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Yes, this is so. So yeah, 13 different adventures. So a lot of players think, you know what, I can just kind of not use this book. Well, that's where this one gets tricky, because first things first, the first chapter, called The Radiant Citadel, basically is kind of like its own little campaign setting book. Campaign settings describe one world where D&D might happen. And campaign settings tend to be really useful for DMs and players alike. So the Radiant Citadel, if you want to create a player that grew up or somehow connected to the Radiant Citadel, the first chapter gives you tons and tons of stuff that you can use to kind of create your characters. Mechanically, there's nothing in here for players. There are no new backgrounds. There are no new class options. There's nothing in here that's going to mechanically affect your character. But there's a lot of lore stuff that you can build, that you can use to create some really, really interesting characters. In addition to that, each adventure is set in a different world. I would kind of almost compare it to, what was it? There it goes. Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, where they had all these different domains of dread, and each one had their own little section and the things like that. This is kind of similar to that, where each adventure is its own little domain. It's its own little world. And the interesting thing about it is, after the adventure itself, at the very end, they have a section called the Gazetteer, which is basically, you see it in campaign settings all the time. The Eberron campaign set had a campaign setting had it. Basically, it describes the world itself. Most of them have a map of the general area that they're describing, with various cities and the things like that on it, which I'm a big fan of. So every single one of these adventures is kind of an adventure and an introduction to a brand new kind of mini campaign setting. And because of that, there's actually a lot that players can use if they do want to create some very, very interesting characters. One of the kind of checkered aspects of the history of D&D is they have expanded D&D, specifically Faerun, to encompass a lot of different cultures. And previous iterations of these used a lot of racist stereotypes and tropes and the things like that weren't really based in any sort of culture. They were based on basically kind of Western European style views of those cultures, which tended to be remarkably inaccurate. Every one of these adventures bases itself somewhat in a different culture. And I'll get into it in my review in a little bit. One of the things I'm not particularly fond about this is they don't actually talk in any way, shape, or form about the cultures that influenced any of these imaginary cultures. They just kind of take from these real world cultures and create their own thing without referencing them whatsoever, which was a problem with earlier editions, is they would just kind of steal stuff from these other cultures and then just never mention that there are actually real cultures and they're actually significantly more interesting than stuff they wrote. So that's not a great thing. But the cultures that themselves are not based on racist stereotypes. They're remarkably interesting. They will allow you to play very, very different characters and let them interact with worlds very, very differently. Very, very different from the kind of stereotypical, medieval European world that you generally deal with in a high fantasy setting like Dungeons and Dragons. So in that aspect, it's really, really interesting. So as far as should players buy this, I would say for the actual asking price, of course, why would I be able to actually copy the text that I need so I can search for what I want? That would be stupid. All right, so the book itself is, yelling at stupid formatting things. The book itself goes for about $29 and then $99 on D&D Beyond. So it's $30 on D&D Beyond. If you buy, and that's for the digital copy, if you buy it through something like Amazon, the retail price, I believe, is $50. So for players, do I believe what is presented here is worth $50? Probably not. If you really want to create an interesting character that's not just your kind of stereotypical Western European style character, there's a lot of other sources that you can get for a lot less. However, the digital version for $30, I think if you're looking to build more interesting characters, I think this is worth the $30. Now, not every player is going to put a huge emphasis on backstory and things like that. Some people really like it, some people don't. If your backstory and kind of like your life before becoming an adventurer is not really a thing for you, then you can probably skip this book. Again, there's nothing mechanical in here you're going to lose out on. There's just a lot of different cultures that you could use to build some very interesting characters. So overall, I would say the physical copy, probably not worth it. Digital copy is worth it if you are interested in creating interesting backstories with different cultures. If that's not your thing, skip the book. Moving on. The second group, Dungeon Masters. So, this one is kind of weird for me. When I go through the actual in-depth review, I'll go through every adventure and talk about the things that I think are cool and the things that I think aren't. As far as overall, the quality of the adventures themselves, I like. Like, there's a lot of really interesting stuff in here. And it's not just, okay, here's a new monster stat block, and here's a story that will get you to eventually fight that monster stat block. There's a lot of different kinds of adventures in here. There are some that are more kind of whodunit style things. There's some that are very kind of political based, and not politics as in like right or left or anything. I'm talking not real world politics. I'm talking about bureaucracy, governmental bureaucracy, and the things like that, and dealing with different groups that are kind of vying for influence and power amongst a population, that kind of stuff. So just the kind of variety of different adventures, I think, is really, really interesting. The actual writing is really hit or miss, with a lot more misses than hitting. And what I mean by that, I'm not talking about the adventures themselves. The adventures are relatively solid. The monster stat blocks, there's not a ton of them in here. Of the adventure source books that D&D has put out thus far, this has the least number of new monsters of any book they have ever put out. But all of those are fine. None of them like really, really leapt out as, oh wow, this looks really, really cool. Aside from one that's basically a fire version of an Axolotl, which is super cool. But they're fine. The issue that I have with it is box text. If you've never run a pre-written adventure before, there's a thing called box text. Box text is generally text that is put in a box. And it's stuff that when you're running the adventure, it's designed for you to literally read it directly to the players. They'll always mention, read this to the players or summarize it in some way if you're not particularly fond of the box text, or if it has a lot of words that you don't like you're using. Like someone like me with a stutter, if it has a lot of words that I'm going to stutter over, I may change the wording. But that's where one of my big issues with this book comes in, is a lot of the box text is just poorly written. The descriptive parts of it are great. I really, really love it. The dialogue, however, is really, really wooden. It's hard to get any kind of a voice out of any of the dialogue. And a lot of times, the dialogue kind of feels like a bad dubbed movie where they just kind of put a lot of like plot into a single line of dialogue so that they don't have to worry about, Western audiences not understanding, all the culture and history behind a particular, Chinese film or something like that. So they just go, hey, you're those adventurers that were prophesied in the prophecy from thousands of years ago that says that for adventurers, like they have quite a few ones that just feel like, hey, lore dump, lore dump, lore dump. And they're, personally, I am a huge proponent on dialogue being the driving force of storytelling in general. Yes, action scenes and things like that and all that tell stories, but dialogue can tell stories that other things simply can't, that narration can't. And so I am very, very particular about my dialogue. I want my dialogue to have a voice. I want you to feel kind of a... dialogue should reflect the attitude and the kind of makeup of the character that's speaking it. And I don't think I saw a single bit of box text with dialogue in it that I could tell who the speaker was without them saying, oh, this person said blah, blah. There is no character to any of it. It just feels like lore dumps. And when I get into my full review, I'll mention a couple of my theories as to why. But overall, from that aspect, it makes it kind of painful to run a couple of these adventures if you run them completely as written and you read the box text. Beyond that, though, like I said, I think the adventures are interesting. The other thing that I really, really like about this is every single adventure has hooks. This is something that they used to do in the Adventures League. I don't know if they do it anymore because I haven't played Adventures League in years. But at the beginning of every Adventures League, at least the early stuff, adventure, you would have a summary of the adventure, or a background of the adventure, a summary of the adventure, so you would have kind of an idea of what the adventure is going to be, and then you would have a player hooks section. And that is something I have not seen in any of the other kind of compilation things. It wasn't in Candlekeep Mysteries. It wasn't in Tales from the Yawning Portal. And if you are doing these little mini adventures like this, having a hook for the characters is really important to having the characters actually play these adventures and feel like they were meant to be here. So the fact that they had the hooks back in, I am super happy about. I want them to do that with every other book like this going forward. They are essential. They also have a little section that tells you how, if you don't want to use the particular worlds that these are set in, you can set them in, this is where it would fit in the Forgotten Realms, or this is where it would fit in Eberron, things like that. So those are nice. The other thing that's nice is, as I mentioned in the player section, at the end of every one of these adventures, they have a gazetteer, which is basically explains the world that this place is in, which is great if you want to run more adventures in some of these worlds. Some of these worlds are really, really interesting, and I would love to see more adventures in them. So you could very easily create a mini campaign in these little worlds. I don't think that any of these worlds are kind of fleshed out enough for you to run an entire 1 to 20 style campaign, but you very easily could run, a 1 to 10 campaign in one of these worlds without too much difficulty. The other thing that's nice is in the gazetteers, they have a little section of, here's some other adventures that you might run in here. So they even have adventure suggestions for each one of these worlds that are not the adventure that's written there. So overall, it's a really nice thing. So should DMs buy this? The physical version for $50, I think this is worth $50. It's a little bit arguable because, again, there are some issues with it. Like I said, box text, you're going to have to rephrase most of it. If there's dialogue in it, you're going to have to rephrase it. But overall, I think this would be worth $50. And, having physical copies of books in general is, I think, more beneficial to DMs than it's ever going to be for players. For the $30, I mean, it's hard to say no. I buy most of my books digitally now because it's just easier for me to go through them. I can blow up the text. I can, bookmark and other things like that. Like, it makes it significantly easier for me to run stuff. So, overall, Dungeon Masters, do I think this is a good buy? Yeah, for the most part, I there aren't many aspects of it I think people are going to be upset about. Moving on. Group number 3, Lore Hounds. This is a unique book in a bunch of different ways. First of all, as far as 5th edition D&D is concerned, every single adventure, source book, campaign setting, whatever has been released for D&D has not been new. And what I mean by that is everything that has been released for 5th edition D&D has been an update of something that already existed. You have, updating Ravenloft to 5th edition, Eberron to 5th edition. Tales from the Yawning Porter was literally reprinting a bunch of old adventures so that they could work in 5th edition. That's kind of what 5th edition has been built around, is this idea of nostalgia being brought back to something significantly more modern and usable. The Radiant Citadel is brand spanking. Even like the Magic the Gathering stuff, which has never existed in D&D, was still stuff that existed in Magic. Like, none of this has ever been new. The Radiant Citadel is actually a new IP. The Radiant Citadel did not exist in any other version of D&D. It's not from Magic the Gathering. It's not from anything. It is brand spanking new. So for Lore Hounds, this is not just, this is how they updated something to fit in 5th edition. This is brand new lore. Each one of the different worlds, as far as I can tell, are also brand spanking new. None of these are taking a previous D&D campaign setting and updating it to 5th edition. This is entirely new stuff. And like I said, for the most part, it's interesting stuff. The world building there is interesting. Like I said, one of my biggest problems with it is they sit there and there are obvious. These are obviously taken from real world cultures. Like you can see one of the things involves effectively a Day of the Dead festival, which is a Mexican holiday. One of these is taken, like, the artwork is blatantly Aztec. Like you can see, it's very, very blatantly Aztec style. The names are actual Aztec names, the things like that. So they do take a lot from real world cultures, and they don't mention anything about the real world cultures that they're taking all of this from. So that, for me, is a little bit upsetting, because these are really interesting, rich, amazing cultures. Even just the little bit of research I did to be able to review this, I learned some fascinating things. Things like the Persian Empire. The fact that the name Persian itself has had a fair amount of controversy, because the Persian Empire is effectively the empire that encompassed Iran, and eventually is what turned into Iran and the areas around it. So for a while, the word Persian was considered a little bit derogatory, and they preferred to be called Iranian or things like that. And so, there's really interesting ththings that they just completely don't even mention. There is a section at the end of the Radiant Citadel called we'll deal with that in the review. Anyway, so as far as Lore Hounds are considered, both the physical and the digital version, I think, are 100% worth it. You are going to have a hard time finding this much lore in any other campaign setting that gets released, and definitely in any other adventure. Because every one of these is a mini campaign setting with an introductory adventure built into it. But because of that, it's really, really good. And I highly recommend, if you're a Lore Hound and you have any interest in learning about new cultures and things that are not, Western European centric storytelling. Like, this is a gold mine. So, yeah. So, quick summary for the three groups of people. Players, digital version is a somewhat yes, but buy it if you're interested in more interesting backgrounds for your characters. If backgrounds aren't your thing, ignore it. And by backgrounds, I mean like your backstory, not physical backgrounds. There's nothing mechanical in here. Physical version, probably don't buy it. For DMs, both physical and digital versions, I recommend buying. However, watch out for box text because anything with dialogue in it, you're going to have to reword for the most part. For Lore Hounds, for both digital and physical copies, I say buy this. You're going to have a hard time finding this much lore in any book that comes out anytime after this. It's really a Lore Hound's dream. So, that being said, let's move into the in-depth review. So, like I said, my in-depth reviews are in-depth. I go chapter by chapter. I talk about things I like, the things I don't like, the things I did wrong, the things I did well. I will give suggestions for the writers and things like that in case they ever watch anything I make. I sincerely doubt they ever will, but if they do, I like to give those suggestions. If you're not here for the whole in-depth review, thank you for watching. In the comments down below, let me know which part of this you think is the most interesting. Do you think the Radiant Citadel aspect is the coolest thing? There's basically kind of like Sigil that's not Sigil. Or is there a particular new world that you're most interested in? Let me know in the comments down below. That being said, let's dive into this. Chapter 1. Welcome to the Radiant Citadel. This is your kind of introductory thing. It's your overview. There's not a ton here. If you've run an adventure before, the only thing that's really, really good in here is they do have a thing that lists the different adventures, and it gives you a brief description of them if you're trying to figure out which one you want to run and you don't want to have to flip through all of them. It's got a really nice thing that tells you level range and a brief description of what's going on. So that's nice. And then they have a section called Thoughtful Introductions. And this is where I think Wizards of the Coast erred on the side of caution a little bit too far. Thoughtful Introductions is basically them addressing Dungeons and Dragons' kind of bad history with adapting cultures that are not, Western European medieval themed. They basically try to give guidance on how to run this. And this is probably my biggest problem with this, is everything in here feels like the book is kind of talking down to you. And this first section really kind of feels that way. And I know why. Without getting too much into politics right now, and I mean real world politics, the idea of cultural appropriation and really anyone from like a European background doing anything from a non-European background has come under fire really, really heavily. It doesn't matter how kind you are to the subject matter. It doesn't matter how sensitive you are to whatever it is. If you are white and you are doing anything from if you are creating anything that takes inspiration from anything not white, you are running into a minefield. 100%. That's what's happening. Because somebody is going to claim cultural appropriation. So this thoughtful introduction section, I think, it feels like there's nothing in here that says this. This is entirely my opinion. Do not think that this is me saying Wizards of the Coast is saying this or any of the authors are saying this. It's not. This is my opinion of what is being written here. But it feels like this is the section that could very easily have been titled For White People. Talks about broad descriptions. Describe everyone's features, not just those whose features are different from your own. Detail, not stereotypes. When describing a character's appearance, strive to detail more than just one thing and avoid description based on stereotypes. The more you can say about body type, hairstyle, and texture, skin tone, clothes, accessories, and the like, the more dimensions a character has. As some societies strongly associate ethnicity with skin color, take extra care when describing your character's skin colors. Consider a range of literal descriptions such as copper, umber, onyx, or ebony, with modifiers such as rich, lustrous, warm, or cool. This entire section is just saying, hey, if you're white, you're going to get in trouble. So here's everything you can do to try and not get in trouble. And there's a right way to do this and a wrong way to do this, and this is the wrong way to do this. I think this could have been significantly better if instead of thoughtful introductions, because we're too stupid to be told, oh, D&D has a really bad history of cultural appropriation and just really, really using a lot of offensive stereotypes of any culture that's not European. And even some European cultures, they use really offensive stereotypes, because why should Europeans get away with not being insulted for their ethnicity? So I think this would have been a lot better with going, hey, the purpose of this book, and again, this book was pitched as, hey, this is the first D&D book that has ever been written by an entirely person of color staff. Like, every member of the writing team was a person of color. It means there were no white people on the writing team. Again, D&D has a long history of doing bad shit. So I think this section was kind of necessary. I think the way they wrote it is unbelievably pandering and insulting at the exact same time. It talks down to you. It basically treats you as this, well, you're not smart enough or you're not mature enough to be able to talk about what we really need to say. So we're going to just tiptoe around the issues here and just pretend that we're giving you good advice for good role-playing and not admitting that the history of our company has had massive problems with racial stereotypes, and this book is an attempt to actually show real cultures from around the world without stereotyping them and fetishizing them into offensive depictions. It's just they even have an entire section called Online and Streamed Games, where they specifically talk about dressing up, and they have a line, similarly, avoid mocking real-world accents in your roleplay. And this is the thing that I find most insulting to me personally. For anyone that doesn't know, I'm American, if you couldn't tell from my accent. And from the fact that I'm blatantly American, from everything I say and do. But my father was from England. My father was born in England, raised in the U.S., went to high school in England. His mother was English and Jewish. I have Polish heritage. I have Irish heritage. And one of the things that I did when I was an actor was I specialized in accents. And I specialized in real accents, not the kind of stereotypical ones that you see all the time. And that is something that is absolutely constant in D&D. Every single dwarf is from Glasgow. And it's a particular part of Glasgow that begins and ends in a bar. Well, hello, I am the dwarf that you're talking to. That is an incredibly stereotypical Scottish accent, and nobody in Scotland speaks that way. The closest I have ever heard of a real-life person speaking like the stereotypical dwarven accent that we hear constantly is... I can't remember his name now. He's a comedian, and he's hilarious. There we go. Billy Connolly. Billy Connolly is brilliant. Not only is he a brilliant comedian, but he's also a writer. He's a musician. I believe he's a poet too. He might not be, but he's absolutely brilliant. But he's Glaswegian. He is starchly Glaswegian. He has a really thick. By the way, Glaswegian means from Glasgow. He has a really thick Glasgow accent. That is the closest you get to an actual Scottish accent sounding like the stereotype you hear all the time. Irish is another stereotypical accent that sounds nothing like the people that actually speak it. Have you ever heard, oh, hidey ho, diddly dee? Or the kind of Irish cop, all right there, get all your things on the floor. That's not a real accent. It never has been a real accent. Again, I have Irish heritage. I learned I learned a few different Irish accents. There are tons of different Irish accents, but by the way, none of them sound like that. So the idea that this book is the one where they go, well, you really don't want to mock real world accents, is really insulting, because D&D and online streamed games and stuff like that have been almost entirely about mocking real world accents. Another one that's mocked all the time, which I've never understood, other than the actual accent is remarkably hard to pull off, is the French accent. Oh, bonjour, I am the French. Nobody in France speaks that way. I had a couple French friends. I actually had quite a few German friends too. German's another accent that everybody gets wrong. German accent's really kind of interesting. But everyone gets it wrong. Literally every accent, even like your standard like English toff accent, every single accent you see, with a few rare exceptions, are mocking real world accents. The likelihood of you hearing someone putting on a fake accent that is not a stereotype of an accent instead of a real accent is remarkably low. So the idea that they had to specifically mention in here, well, don't mock real world accents, is another thing that just feels like it's this pandering, belittling thing, and I really hate it, especially with how cool this book is. I will say, like, one of the adventurers is set in Mexico. Like, it is blatant. One of the artwork has a guy in a sombrero holding a chicken with a mustache. He literally could be off a bottle of sriracha. He'd be off a bottle of hot sauce. Like, that is just how blatantly stereotypical that artwork is. And it's not, I guess I shouldn't say blatantly stereotypical. It screams Mexican culture, which is not a bad thing. But when they rely so heavily on Mexican culture and then they never mention, by the way, this is based on Dia de los Muertos, which is Day of the Dead. Or they don't mention, by the way, this is based on Aztec culture, which was a thriving, incredible society, one of a massive empire for a really long period of history that just kind of disappeared due to a lot of things. A lot of people don't realize. A lot of people blame the Spanish conquistadors on the Aztec Empire just being wiped off the planet. They didn't help in any way, shape, or form. The Spanish conquistador definitely hurt them. But there was actually a lot of stuff happening within the Aztec Empire before they even came that actually decimated them. pretty badly, and by the time the conquistadors, they kind of just finished the job. Gleefully, by the way, like, they're not nice people. But, again, I hate this section because it's a necessary section, because the entire purpose of this book was Wizards of the Coast going, hey, we fucked up majorly. And not really Wizards of the Coast, but Dungeons and Dragons as a brand has fucked up majorly over the years. Maybe we can try to do things the right way. And I think the book was a really nice step in that direction. But then they do stuff like this where they're like, well, we're not going to say that we did bad shit. And we're not going to say that we're aiming this entirely at one group of people, because that is our largest market, but we're going to. If I would have so much more respect for them if they had just said, if they just labeled this section, if they didn't want to say D&D's racist history, they just want to say D&D, Dungeons and Dragons problematic past and how to deal with it, and had these same things, but without just like tiptoeing around. No, this is what happened before. This is why we don't do it anymore, and these are ways that you could avoid from doing it again. This would be a much better section, because they tiptoe around it and try to, just imply, oh, we're not saying that. We're just, maybe you should do this. It's insulting. It's insulting. I think it should be insulting to everyone. Again, with me being my white, cis, hetero, sexual, whatever, me being the most privileged person in the world, I'm insulted by it. And I'm relatively certain people that are not as privileged as me should be insulted by this as well. Like, this just, it's belittling. It's basically saying you're not mature enough for us to speak to you like an adult, so we're going to speak to you like a child and tiptoe around this. This is like spelling out, hey, do you think the kids need a BAF? BATH? BAF. Wow. A BAT. I can't even spell. Like, that's what this feels like. And it's insulting. So yeah, welcome to the Radiant Citadel is a pretty cool section with a giant fuck you at the end. Cool. Next to the chapter. The Radiant Citadel. The Radiant Citadel has already been released on D&D Beyond. I believe you had to have one of the subscriptions to D&D Beyond to get it. But it's been out for a little while. I don't think I've talked about it. It's cool. Like, everything about it is really interesting. It does have kind of a very much have like a sigil. I know it's so technically the official pronunciation is sigil. I hate that. It's such a dumb pronunciation for it. It doesn't roll off the tongue very well. Sigil. See, the thing with sigil, S, I, and L are all at the front of the mouth when you pronounce them. The hard G sound is at the back. So instead of having something that rolls off sigil, j is all at the front of the mouth. G is at the back. So instead of having sigil, which just kind of rolls off the tongue, is really easy to say, you have sigil. And it drops everything into the back of the throat. So you're at the front and then you swallow the word. And I hate that. It's really, really dumb. Anyway, so Radiant Citadel has some associations with sigil. For anyone that doesn't know, sigil is called the City of Doors. And the reason it's called that is sigil sits in kind of the middle of the multiverse. And it has all these doors. Literally every doorway in sigil might be a door that opens into a room, or might be a door that opens into a different campaign setting, a different world. And so sigil was the original kind of multiversal place where you could go if you wanted to have an adventure that jumped between like Eberron and Faerun and all these other things. You could do that by using sigil. The Radiant Citadel kind of has that feel where it's connected to a bunch of different places. It is nowhere near, like, sigil itself is creepy as hell. Sigil is not a nice place in any way, shape, or form. Just sigil itself is scary. It's ruled over by the Lady of Pain. Like, it's a scary place. The Radiant Citadel is much, much nicer. Um, Everything about it is much cooler. It's the design of it is really, really interesting. And yeah, the whole purpose of it is it's supposed to be this kind of multiversal place. Um, the it's hard to say much about the chapter other than it's really cool. The artwork is interesting. The Radiant Citadel is very gem focused, so everything in here looks like it was made of gems. Like everything has facets. The artwork itself, if you're not sure what a facet is, that's if you've ever looked at a cut gem, a facet is like a face of it. A facet is the flat part, and all the different facets are cut and things like that. If you think of like a traditional diamond, the top is at circular to the thing, that would be a facet, and then all the little geometric shapes around it, those are all facets. So the artwork, even like the backgrounds you see, they look like facets, they look like gems. Most of the creatures they describe here are made up of gems. Everything is built around gems. It's really, really cool. If you combine it with the introduction of gem dragons from Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, like this is, if you're into pretty shiny things, like this is a gold mine. And yeah, overall, like the Radiant Citadel chapter, really cool. Nothing about it is really leaps out as being, good or bad. It's a cool thing. So yeah, moving on. The first adventure, Salted Legacy. Salted Legacy is a first level adventure. It's also the only adventure that actually has a level up presented in it. In the middle of the adventure, your characters level up to level 2, which is a good thing because running first level adventures are not fun. They're great for new players because first level you're going to have the least number of just crazy things that you have to be able to understand. It's a great thing for new players. For established players, it's a nice thing because this adventure itself is built around some kind of squabbles between two families that basically have rival businesses. It's set in the market is what they call it, and the whole thing has almost a festival kind of a feel to it. A lot of these are built around festivals. It's kind of a running theme. Is there's some sort of festival going on in I think almost every single adventure. The nice thing about this is this one is very like there is some combat in it. But a lot of it is role-playing, specifically kind of trying to figure out who's telling the truth and who's lying by talking to a lot of different people. If you think about like old school point-and-click adventure style games, this kind of gives me that feeling of those old school adventure point-and-click style games. Because you go around, you talk to a bunch of different people. There's actually some... events that you get to do here that depending on how well you do will get people more likely to give you certain bits of information. And yeah, overall it's an interesting thing. The monster that they introduce here is interesting. It's called a Winling. Yeah, overall it's cool. As far as like the culture that this borrows from, I'm not 100% certain. Some of these are like really, really blatant, like, oh, obviously this is from, that. But this one just seems like a little bit more generic. And it might be just because it was the first level of adventure. One of the things they do is they'll have a section where they list names that are common for people from this particular world. And one of the things that I tend to do is if you go to the web and you search for one of the names, a lot of times if you look up the etymology of the name, you can get an idea of where it's from. Like Surrey has like Indian, as in from India. And I think a lot of the other names in here have kind of an Indian etymological ancestry as far as the names. So I think this one has some aspects of that area. I mean, India is a massive, massive country, and inside of it, like there's a really, really large differentiation of cultures within the country. The same thing is true about most countries. Like a lot of people don't realize, like American. Well, if you go to the Bayou in Louisiana and then go to Los Angeles, those are massively different places. Florida is different than Maine, is different than Wisconsin, is different than Chicago. Like even like Milwaukee and Chicago, which are two massive cities that are only a couple hours away from each other, are just completely different worlds, to be blunt. So yeah, I'm not 100% certain where this one takes its from. And to be honest, this is probably the least, kind of least flesh out of the like mini campaign settings, at least in my personal opinion. So yeah, Salted Legacy, kind of interesting. Nice little introductory adventure. You get to deal with a little bit of like lying and dealing with some unreliable narratives. Or narrators. I like stuff like that. So moving on. The next chapter, Written in Blood. This one is another one that I find really, really fascinating. The story itself, first of all, this one feels kind of like a mystery, with little bits of horror built into it. This is not like a Domain of Dread horror style adventure, but it does have kind of the little bits of horror that you might expect. Like there's a few jump scares in here and things like that, and there's some weird stuff going on. The setting itself is called God's Breath, and again, I'm not 100% certain exactly what God's Breath is based on. It's very agrarian. If you're not familiar with the term agrarian, farmland, things like that, everything is based around farmers and the things like that, and they have a huge emphasis on storytelling and history and the things like that, which is actually a part of a lot of different cultures. Looking at some of the names, it has, I don't know, it has kind of a, I don't know. I'm not going to say where what it's inspired by to avoid making a judgment based on not having enough knowledge. But all the NPCs are all dark skinned and of African origin, and they work on fields and farms. So feel free to make your own judgments based on that. Like I said, the adventure itself, I like the adventure. The adventure is really cool. Effectively, there's a little bit of history, and effectively, people have started disappearing on some of the local farms, and you have to kind of figure out exactly what's this is happening. Like I said, a really nice kind of mystery with a little bit of horror in there. The creature that they created for this, I like. As far as a character or a creature that you would deal with for third level characters, the creature itself is called a Soul Shaker. I won't go into description about what it does, but this could very easily, if your players are unprepared, this could very easily lead to at least a couple character deaths, if not a TPK. I'm not saying that this is a really, really hard monster by any way, shape, or form, but it's got a couple of abilities that for low-level characters can be deadly. So I liked it. I like that there's definite stakes in this. And the adventure itself, like I said, it's interesting. There's a little bit of mind control that you have to deal with. One of the things I'm not particularly fond, there are two NPCs that they introduce in here. Lady Dre and Proclaimer Tungsten Ward are two characters that they introduce. They're just NPCs, and the narrative puts a huge emphasis on these characters have to go with your party. Lady Dre actually has like 3 different ways that she will try to get herself to go with your party. And while you can say no to her, it's remarkably difficult to not get her to go with your party. However, they're really just there to be lore dumps, and then at a certain point, they just give up. Like, they give you these really strong reasons of, no, I need to come with you and I need to know this. And then one thing happens, they go, you know what? We'll just stay here. You guys go on ahead without us. Just so you don't have to deal with them in, like, the final combat or anything like that. And it feels weird that they created these NPCs that they force on your party, and then they just ditch them for no good reason. That the writing in this one for those NPCs specifically feels particularly weak, and I don't understand why. I'm wondering if earlier drafts of this adventure was longer, and when they trimmed it down so that it would fit better, they got rid of why these two characters absolutely positively had to join your party. But yeah, other than that, like, it's a cool adventure. I just really don't like that they shoehorn these two NPCs into the party for no real reason, and then to get rid of them, they're just like, oh, without giving out too much away, there's some wagon trouble. I won't go into any more. There's some wagon trouble, and the wagon is owned by Lady Dre. And so, as you guys are, I mean, the plot is really moving forward. There's a little bit of wagon trouble. And Lady Dre goes, you guys go on ahead. Don't worry about it. I'll stay back and fix my wagon. And Proclaimer Ward goes, you know what, guys? You go ahead without me as well. I'm going to stick with the wagon. Despite the fact that the entire motivation for Tungsten Ward to go with you was he's a storyteller. Like, he's the kind of oral historian of... That's what his entire the Proclaimers are, is they're oral historians. And so the idea of an oral historian, you know, getting this really great story that he's going to be able to tell, and then just going, oh, I'll stay with the wagon, instead of finding out how the story ends and being able to tell how the story ends. Nope, I'm going to stop listening and learning this story that I'm going to be able to tell forever and ever and ever, because that's what I do. And my version of the story is going to be, and then we fixed a wheel for 3 hours. So, yeah, I really want to know what the original pitch for this adventure was, because it feels like something is missing specifically around those two characters, because they just go away. They just disappear in the middle of the adventure for no reason. And with how hard they force them on you, it feels weird that they just ditch them. But anyway, overall, fun adventure. You get to deal with some real creepy stuff. You know, love stuff like that. And and there's little jump scares throughout the entire thing. Like, you just constantly keep dealing with this same, not difficult creature to fight. It's a challenge rating 0 creature. But they keep showing up everywhere. And it's just one of those things that, for me personally, is a great way to build tension. Is, you know, just when you're, you know, searching somewhere, you keep this creepy thing keep showing up, and you keep having to deal with it over and over again. And it's not really hurting you, and it's not really, you know, draining your hit points or anything like that. It just keeps showing up over and over again. It just keeps building that tension. These things keep showing up over and over and over again. Like, I like that. I think it's cool. So, anyway, moving on. The Fiend of Hollowmire. This one has my favorite monster in here. I'm going to... Oh, they might have... this is another thing I really, really like about this. They have pronunciation guides at the beginning of every adventure, which for someone like me is really, really nice. And I love it. I think it's super, super cool. But they created a new monster. Oh, even with a pronunciation guide, this is rough. It's Tlakatikolo. Tlakatikolo. Emphasis on the ko. Tlakatikolo. 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 Anyway, it's an axolotl that's fire. It's super cool. This particular adventure has... this is the one that literally one of the pictures of a guy named Serapio is wearing a sombrero. He has a rooster in his hand. He's got dried corn on his belt sash. Like, he's a stereotypical Mexican. It's hard to not... It's hard to not say that. And so this one obviously has... it's rooted in kind of Mexican folklore for the most part. It's a really, really interesting one. I'm trying to remember what the actual... Because I read through all 14 of these or whatever they were, and they all kind of... Yeah, this is the one. This is the one that it has some, like, deals with the devil kind of stuff going on, and so stuff with that's cool, and curses being transferred from, father to son and stuff like that. So stuff like that I really enjoy. The adventure itself, the artwork is actually really, really good. For anyone that doesn't know, I live in Wisconsin, but I was born in Arizona. And I love the desert. I really, really love the desert. And so some of the artwork just, like, screams desert. Like, I see cacti that I used to see when I lived in Arizona and stuff like that. Despite the fact that Arizona is pretty significantly north of Mexico, the wildlife is remarkably similar. So yeah, overall, the adventure itself is another one where you have to kind of figure out exactly what's happening. This is one where if you read the introduction as a player, it spoils the entire adventure, because the big thing is really kind of figuring out exactly what's going on and what the actual story is. It's got maps and stuff like that, which I'm a big fan of. Oh yeah, and this is the one that's the Day of the Dead party is going on. And maybe this is the wrong one that I was thinking of as far as the... oh no, the Tlakatikolo. Tlakatikolo. However you pronounce it. It's a chupacabra. It's not a... That's not the really cool thing. It's basically... It's kind of like a were-owl kind of looking thing that you have to deal with. And it's another thing. It's super... the stat block itself is really interesting. Something they do in this a fair amount is actually... they use the poison condition a lot. But... something I haven't seen done a ton is while you're poisoned, this additional effect happens. Sometimes it's while you're poisoned, you can't regain hit points, or while you're poisoned, you go into a frenzied rage, or something like there's a bunch of different ways, but it's a really interesting way to deal with the poison condition other than, well, it's the poison condition. You have disadvantage on effectively everything. That can get really boring really quick. This turns it into something even more interesting. And they actually give some really interesting ways about how to deal with the poison condition in this. So, yeah. Overall, like I said, it's an interesting one. I kind of wish they would go a little bit more into kind of the history of uh, the uh, the actual. Oh man, my brain is not working right now. The actual celebration thing that they talk about is called. I can't freaking finding it. The living and the dead celebrate the Night of the Remembered. That's what you call it. The Night of the Remembered is their little festival. And there's, like, I really would have loved a section on the Night of the Remembered. Like, it mentions that it sits there. You know, it mentions that it's something. But I really would have loved a little bit more background on that festival and stuff like that. Because festivals and celebrations and things like that are huge parts of culture in general. Like, learning about the holidays of different cultures really tells you what the cultures respect and the things that are most important to them. And so I really would have loved to see more talk about the actual festival or anything like that. Like, it's cool, but there's a lot more they could have done with this that I think they missed out on. And it wouldn't have created a lot more pages. Like, I'm not talking about give me 20 pages of stuff on this, but have like a single section that talks about that. We're talking about maybe an extra half a page of text that you could have added to this, and maybe shrunk down an image somewhere to make it fit. Like, we're not talking about massive changes, but it would have been nice. So anyway, Fiend of Hollowmire. Fiend of Hollowmine, interesting one. You get to deal with some Chupacabra style stuff. Yeah. Moving on. The Wages of Vice. This is another one where I wasn't 100% certain exactly what culture it was meant to mimic. From what I remember in like the press releases, I think this was supposed to be Caribbean culture. But the first bit of box text talks about elephants, which don't exist in the Caribbean or anywhere outside of Africa and India. So, yeah, I wasn't 100% certain exactly what it was emulating. But again, the press for this was it was supposed to be imitating kind of Caribbean culture, which again would have been really cool if we could have learned about Caribbean culture. But something I like about this, and this is just because again I have a degree in business management, specifically marketing management. I like marketing. I like economics, and this particular culture is a bunch of city-states effectively that thrive because of jelly wine is what they could call it. There's a flower called a jelly flower that they turn into a sweet black wine. And so the reason that they are that the kingdom exists is they are economic powerhouses. This wine made them a ton of money, and that's how their cultures, that's how their cities were able to survive. And first things first, I had heard the phrase dandelion wine. I did not realize that you could make wine from edible flowers effectively. And there's actually a remarkably long history of making flower-based wine. So the little bit of research I got to do into this, I'm like, well, that's kind of cool. I didn't realize you could make wine from flowers. Apparently the first fully like flower, like there was a lot of wines previously that you would add flower petals to the grape juice effectively to flavor it. But as far as a wine that was made entirely from flowers, is actually chrysanthemum wine, I think is what it is, or chrysanthemum, something like that. I just found that really fascinating. So the basics of this is the players stumble upon a murder. And something that I really, really like about this, because some people will think this is kind of railroady. I don't. I think this is a great way to kind of introduce characters to a new place if you just want to put them on the back foot real quick. Is while they're kind of exploring this place, they find a dead body. And after, a couple minutes after they find this dead body, the guards come out and assume they just murdered this guy. And so you have to deal with these guards that are threatening you with murder charges. And I like that. I think that kind of mistaken identity thing can be really, really interesting. Especially when dealing... and they actually give you a bunch of different ways that you can deal with the guards. Like you can fight them. You can try and talk them down. You can surrender and kind of try and deal with it through, their justice system. Like there's a lot of different ways that you can deal with it. And then you meet your big NPC that kind of gives you your real goal. This is another one where you start dealing with another different version of poison, where the poison condition gives specific other effects that push the plot along. And I'm not going to reveal exactly what those additional effects are, but poison is a driving force in this narrative, and I think it's really cool how they use it in here. The story itself, again, this is not so much people are lying to you as much as you have to discover the hidden history kind of thing of a cookie culture, which is another subject I think is really, really fun. The idea that the accepted history is not the real history, and the people in power have kind of hidden that they did something bad before in order to get them where they are. I like that kind of storytelling, the idea of government corruption and things like that. I don't know where in, real life we would ever have to, deal with something like that, but in fantasy lands, obviously that's an interesting thing. And yeah, the stuff that you deal with, I think one of my favorite things about this, the final confrontation, spoiler alert, the final confrontation is kind of a 2-stage confrontation. And the first part of it, there's multiple ways to deal with it. You can fight and kill something. You can kind of negotiate and try and talk down so someone doesn't do it. And then depending on how you do it, other things happen and you deal with some more interesting stuff. So yeah, overall, it's a fun adventure. Something that I do think is kind of interesting that they do in this, I mentioned before, this book has the least number of new monsters of any adventure that has been published by Wizards of the Coast ever. One of the ways they're able to get around that is they will use stat blocks that already exist, and they will just modify it a little bit. Like one of them, they specifically state it uses a Wraith stat block, but doesn't have the sunlight sensitivity aspect of it. So this is something I do in my own games a lot, where I will take a stat block and I will just change some things about it. Generally, I only change the physical description of the creature, and it creates an entirely new encounter that will play very, very differently. So yeah, I like that they did do that, and they do that repeatedly in here. So yeah, moving on. The next chapter, Sins of Our Elders. By the way, this is for 6th level characters. Something else that I find really, really weird, which is another first for the compilation things. There's been 2 compilations that I'm aware of. If I'm missing one, let me know in the comments down below. There's been 2 compilation source books that they put out. There's Tales from the Yawning Portal, which is basically a re-release of old adventures in 5th edition. And they are some of the best adventures that were ever written for D&D. And the second one was, what's it called? Candlekeep Mysteries. And one of the things they did in each of these is in Tales of the Yawning Portal, the original, the first chapter gives a brief history of each one of the adventures and mentions it was written by this person. For Candlekeep Mysteries, at the beginning of every adventure, it says written by this person, edited by this person. It was really, really great for these anthology things where if you go, you know what, I really, really enjoyed this, you would look up the person and see, have they published any other adventures? Do they run their own games? Do they have other things that they write for? And I thought that was really, really interesting. I am not someone that believes in the idea that paying an exposure is ever an acceptable thing. But getting paid and getting exposure is something that I think a smart business person should always consider. You should be willing to take a little bit less money if it's going to introduce you to a new audience that you can capitalize on and get new fans. Like, that is worth some form of monetary compensation. It should never be the entirety of your compensation. But I like that. None of these adventures have an author. They do have, in the credits section, they list everyone that wrote, but I cannot tell who wrote what. There's no references anywhere to find out who wrote what part, which could have been done for a number of different reasons. This is entirely me theorizing. I have nothing to base this on except my own experience in group projects. It could be that none of these were written by a single author. Or none of them were written enough by a single author that you really could say, well, it was mainly written by this one. Could be that the entire group worked on every single one of these stories. I have a hard time believing that because of just how different every one of these stories is. It definitely feels like different people worked. There was probably overlap, obviously. But definitely not every single person worked on every single one of these. Obviously, and because of how this was pitched, I would assume that most of the authors picked a specific culture that they wanted to write about, and that was the adventure. And it was probably one or two, maybe three people on each one of these adventures, with a couple people jumping between multiple adventures. Again, there's a few of these that have similar cultures that they draw from, so I would assume those were probably written by overlapping authors. So that's one theory. The theory that I have is there was some controversy after Candlekeep Mysteries came out because one of the authors got really, really upset that they weren't allowed to completely rewrite Forgotten Realms history. I know, weird, right? And so they made this huge stink on social media claiming that it was because of their race that they were disrespected and they were treated so poorly. They weren't. They were treated better than literally any other writer I've ever heard working for Wizards of the Coast, because I have quite a few friends that write adventures for Wizards of the Coast. And I was working on writing my own adventure for Wizards of the Coast. I got the little packet that told me what I was allowed and what I was not allowed to do. I'm very familiar with the process. And I helped run a convention where we would hire people to write adventures for us. So that were officially sanctioned by Wizards of the Coast and the Adventurers League. So I know the process. They were treated very, very well. But because of that, it might be that they didn't put the names on here to avoid something like that happening again. Which I can't really blame them. But again, it's another thing that kind of upsets me. Because again, some of these are really, really interesting adventures. And I would like to know who wrote them so that if they have other adventures that maybe they publish on the DMs Guild, maybe they help out with other books, that's going to be a reason for me to want to look into those books. Specifically look for the stuff they do. And I've got no idea what they did. So, yeah. Anyway, so Sins of Our Elders. Going into the actual story. This one... This one, as far as I can tell, has, I believe, Yeah, this one is obviously inspired by folklore China. There's a like a lot of the art and everything looks like it could have been pulled directly out of like Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which is a brilliant book, and has spawned a bunch of video games. But it's also it's considered one of the five great Chinese novels. Like it's a brilliant piece of literature. And the first picture you see is someone wearing kind of traditional Chinese armor, wielding a guandao. Which, if you don't know what that is, guandao is effectively a Chinese glaive. The reason it's called a guandao is because in Romance of the Three Kingdoms, one of the three brothers wielded it. And so his name, I believe, was Guandao. I'm gonna. What's its name? Come on, it's not that hard. What's the dude's name? Guan Yu. Okay, so Guan Yu was one of the three brothers in the Romance of the Three Kingdoms from the. I think they were Wei. I can never remember. And he used a Guandao, and so the name was the Guan name is what the relationship is. So anyway, this is obviously kind of Chinese folklore style thing. The adventure itself is another one of these things where you have to kind of find the hidden history and to deal with it. And this one actually deals with the idea of memories and not wanting to be forgotten. Which I really like. Like that kind of theme of, you know, I want people to remember me long after I'm dead, or I want to have some sort of impact. You know, that fuels the main antagonist of this is the idea of I need to be remembered. It's cool. I like it. The adventure itself is, again, you do a little bit of sneaking around, a little bit of investigation, stuff like that. You have to get information from people using a bunch of different skills checks and stuff like that. This one has a little bit more combat than the other ones that have been there thus far, which is fun. And then I'm trying to remember the rest of it. And then kind of the crux of it, depending on how you deal with the main antagonist and how you deal with that, affects how everything else works. You know, there's a good ending and a bad ending and kind of a mixture in the middle kind of ending. So there's a lot of cool stuff in here, and the culture itself is interesting, to say the least. There's a lot of very kind of flowing gowns and things like that in everything that they wear, which is kind of cool. And this one actually, most of the others, they have, you know, adventures in the places Yanido is what the setting is called. And most of them have like 4 different other adventures that they give you a little hook for. This one actually has 8, which is kind of cool. So this one feels like a little bit more well worked out because there's a little bit more you can do in it if you wanted to run like a full campaign here. So, yeah. Moving on. The next chapter, Gold for Fools and Princes. This is a 7th level adventure. Again, there's so many adventures going through my head right now. I have to really quick read the description to remember what in the hell's going on in this one. This one involves a collapsed mine. Basically there's two princes that are trying to use this event as a way to garner favor in them being able to get their way to the throne. So this one kind of combines a little bit of politics with, you know, again, something that obviously has no real world correlations. The idea of a government using a tragedy to try and fuel their own wants and needs. I don't know where they come up with ideas like this, because obviously that doesn't happen in the real world. But again, it's another subject that I think is really, really fun to explore in tabletop RPGs, especially since this one I did not go anywhere near as kind of deep into, as far as reading all of it, because I was my eyes are starting to cross at this point. But as far as I can tell, I don't think there's I don't think there's like a good brother and a bad brother, or a good prince and a bad prince. I think they both. It's one of those things where you need to decide on your own which one you feel is in the right here. Like there's no clear. This is the right one. This is the wrong one. You know, you're gonna have a bad ending and a good ending, and I like that. I hate when adventures kind of give you this kind of false dichotomy of where you can be the good guys or you can be the bad guys. I love it when there's this idea of, okay, well, there are people, and some of them have more altruistic motivations and some of them have more kind of selfish motivations, and you have to decide which your characters in specific want to deal with. At the end, or I guess maybe this one does have. Oh no. I guess there is a right and a wrong person, which I really, really hate, because it's just dumb. But anyway, I think this could have been better if they made them a little bit more ambiguous, but whatever. At the end, no, I'm not remembering it. I'm not as thrilled with this one, to be perfectly honest. It's still an interesting adventure. You know, you get to deal with, again, two people trying to use something to be advantageous for themselves, but there's definitely a right and a wrong person in this particular instance, and I think, at least in tabletop RPGs, I don't like that aspect. I think the players should be able to kind of make their own decision on who they feel is the right person and the wrong person. I hate it when they make it pretty clear in the narrative that one person is obviously the bad prince, one person is obviously the good prince. So, yeah. This is another one that I thought was really, really weird, because trying to figure out where this one is specifically kind of taking, what culture this one is taking inspiration from, doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because most of the artwork is of people that are obviously from African descent, but the clothing work of everything looks significantly more Indian, which obviously there's some crossover. India and Africa are remarkably close, but they are very different cultures. Like Prince Simbun, his artwork, he has a sword. The sword that he's carrying, if you look up on Wikipedia, the word Shamshir. Shamshir is a type of scimitar. Specifically, it is an Indian scimitar, and it's one of the reasons it's as well known as it is it has a really, really noticeable curve to the blade. Scimitars in general are going to have a curved edge to the blade. This one has a pretty extreme curve. If you look on the Wikipedia page for the Shamshir, specifically the Indian version of the scimitar, it looks almost identical to the sword that Prince Simbun is carrying. Like it is the shape of the handle, the make of the guard, the actual curvature of the blade, everything is almost identical. So it is obvious that this takes a lot of inspiration from Indian culture, but then it also puts in African cultural things as well. Like this one was kind of interesting. And again, this would be one of the reasons why I really wish they would go, by the way, this is inspired by this Kuka culture. If you'd like to learn more about this culture, these are really, good sources that will teach you more about the actual culture, not the one that you will find in, Western textbooks that give you nothing about this. This is that culture written by someone from that culture. That would be something that would be really, really interesting and would also be really, really good if you wanted to continue adventuring in the Sensa Empire, which is where this is. This particular adventure is what got me starting looking into like the Persian Empire, because there is a specific empire from like the 2nd to like the 8th century in Iran, Persia, whatever you wanted to call it at that time, that has almost the exact same name as the Sensa Empire. They just change a couple letters around. I have to... Is that it? No. But it's very, very similar to the point where I would have a hard time believing that it wasn't inspired by this. And this particular empire is what a lot of people consider the Persian Empire. It is the longest empire in that history. It ended right... what ended the empire was when the kind of Muslim conquest of that entire region happened, and it was a really, really interesting culture that exists there. It was there were many different religions that existed there. Once the Muslim conquest came through, it became primarily Islamic. Because that's generally what happened when religions in general take over areas, is they convert everyone to their religion. Same thing happened with the Byzantine Empire and Christianity. But like it was this really, really cool culture that I didn't realize existed, and the only reason I learned about it was I spent a lot of time trying to figure out where in the world these guys took inspiration from. I think, again, I think that's probably the biggest misstep with this book, is if they could have just had a little section at the end. By the way, this was inspired by these cultures, and if you'd like to learn more about these cultures, these are really good books that you could read on these cultures that give you a much better idea. And again, I'm relatively certain the reason why is they are terrified of people making the same mistakes that were made by D&D years and years and years and years ago, where they just were kind of butchering and plagiarizing entire cultures and bastardizing them. So I get the idea of that, but it still feels like this kind of... It feels like they're talking down to us. They're like, well, we can take stuff from these cultures, but you can't, because we are significantly better equipped to understand what is okay and what is not okay. You could never understand what is not okay, so we're not even going to give you the option to know what these real, actual cultures that we are taking inspiration from are. We get to know, you don't get to know. And I hate that. I find it belittling. Anyway, so Gold for Fools and Princes, it's got some interesting ideas. It could have been better. I would have much preferred something where you get to kind of pick which one you think is actually right, as opposed to one being the bad prince and one being the good prince. Moving on. Trail of Destruction. This is the one that I really, really liked. And again, it's this one. This is the one that I believe is Aztec. Yeah, this one is inspired by Aztec culture. And the Aztec language and names in general are really, really interesting. And they're not something that I pronounce particularly well. Like the region is Theltepec. Theltepec is what the region is, and it's like I love Aztec names and things like that because they're so interesting, and there's a lot of syllables and very small words and things like it's a really really pretty thing. So anyway, so this one is obviously inspired by Aztec civilization, which again, really really cool, interesting civilization that lasted. It was a huge empire. Lots of really really cool stuff in there. The artwork in here, the artwork in the Radiant Citadel is kind of hit or miss as well, because some of it looks much closer to what you see in most other D&D books, which is not bad in any way, shape, or form. But it kind of has this style that doesn't quite look real, I guess. It looks fantasy, I guess is the best way to describe it. And that's definitely true about this stuff. But every so often you just see these amazing pieces of artwork that just blow your mind. This one doesn't really have it. But the kind of the plot for this is you're in a volcanic region, and a bunch of earthquakes have been happening, and elemental creatures are starting to show up, and so you got to kind of figure out what are the earthquake coming from? Why are there elemental fire creatures just showing up? And maybe we should deal with this before something really, really bad happens. Because if you combine a volcanic region with earthquakes and things from the elemental plane of fire showing up, you can kind of figure out what bad stuff might be going on, and you know that you probably want to fix it. And this has my personal favorite monster that they create for this. It is called the Tlexot. I'm going to see if they have a pronunciation for this, because I'm going to butcher it. See if they have it. All right, so Tlexxolotl is, I can't pronounce it. Tlexxolotl. Fleshalotl. Fleshalotl. That's what it is. Fleshalotl. That's what it's called. Fleshalotl. It's hard to say without a stutter. Give me a break. Anyway, this is an axolotl, which is if you've never seen one of these things, they're like geckos, but they have these little like fin things that come out of their ear. Like, they're adorable. And this is a giant fire version of one, and it's super cool. Like, everything about it it's just cool. Like, there's nothing else I can say other than this is a cool monster. The stat block itself is cool. The one problem I have with the stat block is it's a 2-column stat block. At the very bottom of the first column, it has actions, red line, and then the top of the second column actually has the actions. And I hate that when they break up stuff like that, because you might not realize that all of these are actions. Like, I just add a couple extra spaces and put it in the top. Like, it wouldn't have been that hard to do. Shift the picture down a couple inches. Not even a couple inches. We're talking like maybe 3 centimeters. So anyway, this one has my favorite monster from this. And again, the whole thing is, this one almost has kind of a I don't know, like a disaster film kind of feel to it, where bad things are happening and you have to figure out what are causing the bad things before the bad things turn into a world-ending disaster. And that's something that I don't tend to see a ton in D&D adventures, which I think is cool. Like, everything with D&D is like, oh, this evil lich is going to kill the world with zombies. Oh, my. For shame. Surprise. That's my Gomer Pyle impression. And this one is just like, hey, yeah, hey, nature, you nasty. This is nature is the elements are causing issues. And obviously, the elements in D&D are not just nature. The elements are living, breathing things. But I do like that kind of idea. You have to kind of deal with that. There's there's a collapse section where stuff starts falling. You got to get out of the way before bad stuff happens. Basically, your end of Metroid style thing, and it doesn't even happen at the end of the the thing. But if you've ever played a Metroid game, at the very end, you always have to run away from an exploding planet or exploding something. So yeah, as a fan of Metroid, I gotta love that. Like I said, I think the coolest thing about this, I really, really like all the artwork and just all the Aztec influences, because it really, really looks cool. And this is another one that just kind of feels a little bit more fleshed out. Like this feels a little bit more like a real place that you could do stuff in. So anyway, moving on. The next chapter in the Mists of Manivarsha. This is a 9th level adventure. This is another kind of battling the elements kind of thing. This I'm not 100% certain what culture this one is referencing. However, from the images, this looks South American, like around the Amazon style kind of stuff. That whole South American area, rivers being the culture here is very, very river focused, where rivers make a huge part of everything that they did to do. South America, the Amazon River made kind of thrive. Like the Amazon River was a huge source of kind of life, and a lot of different civilizations kind of popped up based on the river. And river access in general is a huge driver of society in general. Like, Egypt was based. Egypt relied so heavily on the Nile, they deified it. They considered it a deity. So yeah, having a culture that's built around their rivers and being very closely related to it, and kind of the thing is, there is a competition, which I'm a big fan of, like in RPGs in general, not just TTRPGs, but just RPGs in general, having like an arena event. Like, I like, going into things where, your enemies are not evil people who are trying to kill you. They're other combatants, and you're trying to test your abilities against them. I like that kind of theme. And so there's a competition that happens in this, and the river floods, and you have to deal with the fact that not only did all the champions get flushed away, the sacred trophy got flushed away, and you have to deal with the aftermath of this giant flood. So again, this is another one where you have to kind of deal with, why is nature doing this? What is going to happen? How are we going to deal with this? And it has kind of that naturist vibe of, how do we coexist with nature and the elements? And in this particular instance, the elements are living beings, which is always a fun fun thing to deal with, and a fun subject to kind of have stories based around. The artwork, the thing about this one, the artwork is incredible. Like, they have two like full blown like page. I think they're either half page or full page pictures, and they are just mind bogglingly gorgeous. To the point where I want to find out who the artist was. I tried to see if they were signed or anything. They're not. They list the artists in the back, and it's a big list of things. I guess I got kind of spoiled after Tal'Dorei Reborn, where every single piece of art, whoever did the art, in the credit section, you could actually look and see who did every single piece of art. I really, really like that, because I found a lot of artists that I was blown away by, that I could find more of their work. This doesn't let me do that, and it's upsetting, because the artwork in this adventure specifically is mind-bogglingly good. Like, it's just gorgeous, and I love it. Like, the first image I saw, I'm not kidding, I'm scrolling down the page, I get to the first image, and I just go, whoa. Like, it's cool. So yeah, overall, again, I don't like giving too much away. But this one does have a very kind of naturalist, naturist style thing where you have to kind of deal with the elements and stuff like that, which I'm a big fan of. I think it's an interesting adventure. Moving on. The next chapter, Between Tangled Roots, is a 10th level adventure. If I remember correctly, this one it has some very strong ties to the Philippines, which is another culture that, at least in Western society, specifically in America, we don't really learn a ton about Southeast Asian culture, like the Philippines and all those kind of archipelagos down there, just above Australia, and not only is it really cool, you get to deal with a dragon that is significantly more like dragons in D&D are based primarily on European dragons, which are quadrupedal and very reptilian. Asian dragons, Chinese, Japanese, are serpentine. And fun fact, dragons in Chinese and Japanese folklore are actually associated with water, as opposed to dragons in European folklore are generally associated with fire. Fire-breathing dragons. Asian dragons are water based, and so you get to deal with kind of an interesting, different type of dragon that didn't exist before. It's very kind of, this one is more aquatic serpentine. Like this has more in common with kind of reptilian fish hybrid than the more serpentine versions of like Chinese or Japanese dragons. And I think probably my favorite thing about this is everyone lives on these islands, but in order to get between islands, they have these things called sky bridges, which are these literally floating bridges that span miles. They have people that actually live on these bridges, like little mini cities and stuff on these bridges, and the artwork for them is just so cool. And the idea of, again, having these massive bridges in the sky that you can walk between islands because of these bridges, and they're not like, they're not suspension bridges. They look like dragons almost, like they kind of curve and do this kind of serpentine, follow this serpentine pattern to the next island. That it's really, really cool, and I love the idea of these sky bridges. Just the idea that they exist and that there's, there are people that there's a very good chance that they've lived most of their lives living on one of these bridges and probably very rarely stepping off of them, because they have, little, if I remember correctly, they have little cities on the bridges. Specifically both roadways and refuges, with whole communities dwelling along some of the miles-long spans. So yeah, I mean, you theoretically could have someone that grew up on one of these bridges and never left it until they became an adventurer, and that would be such an interesting thing, because growing up on something that is suspended hundreds of feet in the air means that anytime you come to the edge of town or something, it's not like, oh, that's the edge of town. That's, oh, look, if you leave, you will die. Earthquakes and things like that. If the ground gets, damaged or anything, you can fall through and die. Like, that's an interesting thing. So I like that. The giant dragon thing, like the whole point of this is you have to kind of deal with this dragon and see what's going wrong, because the dragon, the reason the sky bridges exist is this dragon, this kind of dragon helped people build them, and now it's causing problems, and so you have to kind of figure out what to do. And the end of the adventure, there's a bunch of different ways you can deal with the dragon, and again, I like that. I like the fact that you can make the decision of, okay, do I do I want to try and save this? Do I think they're beyond redemption? Do I just want to kill them? You know, there's a lot of different choices and it gives you a lot of different ways that you can play. That means a lot of different party types can play this adventure and still have fun. So yeah, overall really cool. Moving on. Shadow of the Sun. This is an 11th level adventure. This one's cool because this one again has kind of a Persian, almost Babylonian feel to it. Like a lot of the names are very much kind of Middle Eastern in nature. This one's something I really like about it. This one has a chase in it. Let's talk about. There's a lunar festival. Apparently happens 3 times a year, triennial. A monster attack brings the characters to the attention of the Bright Guard, which are basically, they call them holy enforcers of the city-state of Akharin Sangar. And the ruler of this country is an angel. And so you do get kind of that interesting, you do get to kind of deal with a little bit of the angels, you know, almost Diablos style thing where you get to deal with, you know, the angels and their culture and stuff like that. I think it's kind of cool. The city itself is not a city of angels or anything like that. But it's ruled by an angel and you get to deal with that. And like I said, there's a chase in here. I love chases in D&D. I don't think people use them anywhere near enough because it can be really, really exciting, especially if you do a timer or something like that. I know some people are really hesitant to use timers or anything because it can add a lot of stress to a game where you don't want a ton of stress. But I think in a chase style situation, adding a timer can be super, super fun, especially if you only give the players, depending on how fast your players are, and how evil you want to be, you can give them, okay, 10 seconds. What are you doing? Or you can be 30 seconds or something. I probably wouldn't ever go beyond 30 seconds for a chase style thing because that just gives them way more time they're ever going to use. But you describe what's happening. You go 10 seconds. What do you do? Even if no one ever uses the entirety of the 10 seconds, just having that time limit will add to the tension and just make it that much more fun. Yeah, overall you have to figure out exactly what's causing, you know, the monster attacks and figure out, again, I really love chases. There's flying carpets in this, which it's a flying carpet chase, folks. Spoiler alert, but flying carpet chase, super, super cool. I need to remember what this is. And this is another one where you, this one has multiple factions, and you get to side with a faction. And depending on the faction that you side with, you will have a different. Not only will you have a different ending, they actually give you different rewards, which I really, really like. I think it's super, super cool. So this is another one I think is one of the better adventures. I think you can have a lot of fun with it. And again, flying bridges is cool. Moving on. The next one is the Nightsea's Succor, which is a 12th level adventure. This one. The kind of main thing about this is, historically, I'm going to pronounce it wrong. Where you go? The Jainai. Were attacked, and some of their people were basically stolen away and taken underwater, where they developed their own society called Janya. And so this adventure is basically you, and I think neither society is super, like, I believe the Jaina are not familiar, are not aware that the Janya exist. So you have this really cool thing where you get to kind of delve into the history of this culture and find out, you know, a really horrible thing that happened in their past. You get to kind of deal with the aftermath of that, and And this is another one where you kind of have a couple different groups that are kind of um, vying for your to trust, and you kind of get to choose which ones you like and which ones you don't, as far as which way you're going to go, and what you're going to do to kind of solve this rift that is formed between these two cultures. Um, so yeah, again, without going into too much detail, I like the world. I really like the idea of parallel cultures in general. I think that can be really, really fun to explore for an RPG. Just because when you have people that these parallel cultures, they have similar ancestors. You can find people from the above water group and the below water group that are distant relations, and especially if there's a conflict between the two cultures, it can be a really, really interesting storytelling perspective when they start meeting. Oh my God, you're my 27th cousin thrice removed. We're related by blood. It's weak blood relation, but you're family. And that idea, I think, is a really, really fun topic to deal with in an RPG, because again, the idea that there's always a right answer and always a wrong answer, I believe, is bad writing. What is the right and wrong answer should be something that your players get to decide and discover on their own. And I think this one kind of deals with that. Not really, but similar ideas. Anyway, moving on. The next chapter is Buried Dynasty. It's a 13th level adventure. This one is the politics I talked about before. This is pure politics, and not like, oh, politics, so you left or right. No, this is bureaucracy. This is government bureaucracy. This is double speak. This is stuff. I love stuff like this. I try to write it into a lot of my homebrew stuff. I like to have bureaucracy be something, because coming from a background in retail, the true villain in a story about retail a lot of times is bureaucracy. Because a lot of times you are stopped doing the things that you want to because you have to sign 27 forms and get them notarized 13 different times to just do the thing that will fix the problem that some bureaucrat somewhere else that has never set foot inside a store caused, because they don't understand how real stores work. I love being able to deal with that in a tabletop RPG where I don't have to sit there and go, yes, sir, Mr. Smithers, sir. Of course, Mr. Smithers, sir. No, your farts don't smell, Mr. Smithers, sir. That's what you had to do in retail, or you wouldn't have a job. And being able to explore them in RPGs where you just get to hurl fireballs at people with consequences. Don't forget there are consequences to your actions. But I love not having to rely on your livelihood for this bureaucracy. And again, this is based on kind of classic Chinese folklore, like the White Jade Emperor is kind of the ruling force of this world. And if you're familiar with kind of Chinese folklore, the Jade Emperor is a huge, huge part of Chinese folklore, to the point where Stargate, one of my favorite science fiction series ever, one of the Goa'uld or aliens that basically imitated gods to subjugate various peoples. And in the original Stargate movie, they were all Egyptian gods. But eventually, as the Stargate SG-1 series went on, they started having other cultures show up. Like Kronos was one of the big gods. Baal was one of the big gods, and he's a Mesopotamian god. Kronos is Greek. But one of the Goa'uld, one of the oldest Goa'uld, was Lord Yu, and he was based on the Jade Emperor from Chinese mythology and folklore. So the White Jade Emperor, like, just blatantly taking inspiration from the Jade Emperor. Yeah, they even have this thing called potions of longevity. If you're familiar with Chinese folklore, things like Journey to the West, the way that the immortals stayed immortal is they had this special drink that the name of it is escaping me right now. But it was a special drink that made them immortal. If they didn't drink it, they would die. So these potions of longevity kind of fit that same kind of theme of the immortals are immortal because they have this special elixir that they can use. And so I love Journey to the West. I think it is a brilliant story. I love their Journey to the West has been adapted over and over and over again in a lot of different situations. Like the story itself is just brilliantly well written. Probably the most famous adaptation of Journey to the West, at least in the West, is Dragon Ball. The original Dragon Ball series, Goku, Goku, is meant to be is inspired by Sun Wukong, who's the Monkey King, who is the kind of main character. Well, not the main character. He's one of the main characters in Journey to the West. Yeah, it's a really, really cool. I love Chinese folklore, and again, this particular adventure, this is a lot of backdoor dealing and double speak and corruption and just stuff that I love. Not saying that there isn't. To give you a perfect example, there is a subchapter called "What's Left Unsaid." Like, that is like the epitome of politics and stuff like that. Is a chapter that talks specifically about, oh, by the way, this is what they're not telling you. Like, I love that stuff. I really, really love it. The really cool thing, if you piss off the wrong people in this adventure, you can actually get kicked out of the entire kingdom. You get exiled. So I think that's really, really cool. And yeah, so much of this is just dealing with people that are double dealing and triple dealing and manipulation and all that, and I love that. I think it's so much fun. You see a lot of, like, you don't see this in D&D a ton. You see this a lot more in things like Vampire the Masquerade is almost famous for how much of the game is manipulation and politics. But you don't have to have a system like Vampire the Masquerade in order to make really good political style adventures, and this is a perfect example of this. This is probably one of my favorites. I don't know if I have a favorite adventure in this, but this is one of my favorites. Finally, the final chapter, Orchids of the Invisible Mountain. This one is near and dear to my heart for no other reason than there are Thri-kreen in this, and I love Thri-kreen. If you don't know what Thri-kreen are, they are an insectoid race. They originated in the Dark Sun campaign setting, which is my favorite campaign setting. But they show up in here. This one is... I'm not 100% certain what this takes inspiration from, which culture it takes inspiration from. But this one is kind of interesting because this one deals with the Feywild. And you actually travel kind of in between the Prime material plane and the Feywild. Which I like, interplanar stuff, especially for 14th level characters. This is when you should start dealing with other planes of existence and doing some interesting stuff there. And this is another one where you're kind of dealing with kind of ancient history of the land itself is called Atagua, I think. Yeah, Atagua. I got it right. So the land itself is called Atagua. And ancient history of Atagua. They had connections to the ghost orchid Tepui, which is a part of the Feywild. And then they were conquered, and they kind of lost that connection. The conquerors never got that connection, and now they're starting to get that connection back. And you kind of have to deal with the fact that this connection was severed and is now no longer severed, and kind of the repercussions of that. Which again, I think makes an interesting thing. And again, probably the most fun of this is you get to jump between planes relatively offlit, which is just fun to do. So yeah. Anyway, so that's the last adventure. They do have one last section called Beyond the Radiant Citadel, which just talks about do they have a? Of course, they don't have a pronunciation guide for this. The Taib Empire. Just another kind of little campaign setting that you can go to the Taib Empire and Umizu. So this just two more sections that you could that are connected to the Radiant Citadel that you could set more adventures in. So overall, again, interesting, fun stuff. So final thoughts. Overall, the book is impressive, with just the massive amount of stuff that they kind of pile into this book is cool. Like I said, the writing is a little bit hit or miss. Most of the adventures are pretty good. A couple of them are dialogue in this is really, really bad. And again, I think the reason that the dialogue is so soulless is probably that idea of, well, we don't want to be accused of cultural appropriation. We don't want to write accents or anything into it. And instead of just not writing accents into it, they just didn't write any emotion whatsoever into the dialogue, and it really turned out bad. But despite that, it is pretty interesting. Like I said, my biggest issue with this is there is this underlying feeling throughout the entire book, and it's exemplified by the end of the first chapter. That section of thoughtful introductions is just this idea of you are not mature enough to know that these are all based on real societies that really existed. And this is based on actual folklore. And to me, what I was expecting to get out of this and what I actually got out of it are two very, very different things. If you look at the other videos where I've talked about this, I've mentioned that I was really looking forward to learning about other cultures, and that through this, the fact that they were emphasizing that these are going to be based on real life cultures. It's like, wow, this is going to be really cool. You're going to be able to learn about other cultures. And nowhere in the entire book does it ever mention that any of the cultures that they create in here are based on real cultures. And to me, that is the biggest slap in the face they could have done for this book. I don't know if the writers actually had a say in that or not. This could have been a top-down decision. It could have been the authors themselves saying, you know what, we don't want to... And again, I get the idea, them not wanting to contribute to cultural appropriation or anything like that. But let's be 100% honest. This book is cultural appropriation. As much as I hate that, because I don't agree a lot with the idea of quote-unquote cultural appropriation. Yes, it's really, really bad if you steal things from other cultures and call them your own. That is horrible. But learning about other cultures and respectfully adding those cultures to your worlds, I don't think that's cultural appropriation. I think that is a way that people can learn and grow, and I think that should be happening in D&D. I think that should be happening in RPGs in general. Learning about other cultures through games, through things that you can really dive into and really feel like you're experiencing it. I think that can be a powerful tool to grow understanding between cultures, to show people just how amazing these other cultures are. And this doesn't. It doesn't even exist that these are... It doesn't even mention that these are real cultures, that these are based on real things. They just go, hey, look at this cool thing. We made this really cool festival that's all about the dead coming back to life. And look at this cool stuff where people like, paint skeletons on themselves. It's so cool that we made this and it totally doesn't exist in the real world. Like it's insulting. Especially with how they pitched this book. I really wanted this book to be something that's like, wow, I learned something from this. And I didn't. I'm not saying don't get it. Again, I think it's a really great book. But if the goal was to highlight cultures that had never been highlighted, guess what? You epically failed. You shit the bed so bad on this that it feels like a step backwards. And all they needed to do was have a tiny section at the end of each of these. By the way, this was inspired by this culture. Read these books by these respected authors, and you can learn about a real culture that really exists. So, yeah. Like I said, I recommend picking up the book. But I also recommend giving Witches of the Coast an earful for... I don't really know how else to describe it because I hate the term cultural appropriation. But this 100% is cultural appropriation. Despite the fact that the people writing it, from my knowledge, are members of that culture. The company itself is not. And they didn't acknowledge whatsoever that they took inspiration and sometimes just blatantly stole from these cultures. Didn't mention them at all. And then they have a section at the beginning going, by the way, you need to be respectful of other cultures because if you do things, then, naughty. Except that's what this entire fucking book is. So, yeah, like I said, I like the book overall as an adventure. As an adventure compendium, there's a lot of good stuff in here. As something that highlights other cultures, fuck you, Wizards of the Coast. This doesn't highlight anyone's culture. It's cool stuff, don't get me wrong, but nowhere in here at all did I feel like I was learning about a new culture. No, I was reading stories. Good, interesting, fun stories, but this book could have been a lot more. Anyway, that is all for me today. As always, remember, like, subscribe, turn notifications on in the comments down below. Which one of these new worlds are you most interested in visiting with your characters or running players to them? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that's all for me today. I'll see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.